The process by which we choose Supreme Court justices seems fairly objectively to not really be working. If you're in power right now and you're choosing those justices, maybe you're okay with it. But there are clearly some issues here, and we can't forget about the fact that our Supreme Court is functionally very different than the equivalent bodies in any number of other Western democracies. But it doesn't have to be this way. There are proposals to reform the Supreme Court, and we've got one that we want to discuss on the show today, including the congressman who put forward the proposal, Khanna. Welcome back to the program.
And always great to be on.
Great to have you here, and I'm very glad that you're doing the important work of making these proposals. So just about a week ago, you had a bill to change the way the Supreme Court functions in a few different ways. What are the major parts of it?
Well, it's very simple. There shouldn't be Supreme Court justices who are there for 40, 50 years. I mean, you're basically having a previous generation make rules for a contemporary generation. That was never the intent of the founders. They thought people would be on the court towards the end of their lives as a final service to the nation for a few years, not that they'd be there for 50 years. So our bill says you can be on the court for 18 years. It's constitutional because you're a judge for life, but after you're done your 18 years on the Supreme Court, you go to a circuit court or you go to a lower court and you finish off your service as a judge. So there's nothing that compromises your independence, but every president gets 2 picks, and it's actually a very bipartisan proposal. In fact, I had a Republican signed up for the bill because they're for term limits for Congress and Senate. And then, of course, the Supreme Court thing happened, and now Republicans don't want to touch it. But there's nothing, how can you be for term limits for Congress and term limits for senators and not be for term limits for Supreme Court justices?
And to be fair, your bill exempts current justices on the Supreme Court. They would continue on for 10, 20, 30, 70 years, whatever it is. So you're not saying we're going to radically remove people from the court or anything like that.
No, in fact, that's what makes it so fair. If it was based on my own ideology, I'd probably obviously want to get rid of the court and start from scratch, given that it's a conservative makeup. But it's not playing any partisan games. It's exempting those who are already there, and it's saying let's just be rational about the process. And every president gets 2 picks, and eventually you'd have a court that is not as high stakes in terms of each battle, less polarized, and more reflective of what people want.
And the avoiding the high stakes battle and what will likely be, the last year of any presidency from now on is going to be poisoned in terms of if a Supreme Court nomination needs to be made. So nobody I wouldn't expect would want that. You're not saying if Amy Coney Barrett gets on the court, she's gone in 18 years. So my gut says though that many Republicans won't like this. Why though? It doesn't seem to benefit either of the two parties. It seems to reduce the tension during one of the most, one of the most fiery parts of any presidency is the Supreme Court battle. So why wouldn't they sign on to this?
Yeah, I mean they should, and a couple of them I don't want to say who were willing to sign on until I think they got cold feet. And the reason is because now they may have a conservative majority, and they want to just entrench that majority, and they don't see an advantage. But what they're not figuring is there is the pendulum always swings in American politics, and as early as January, we may have the Democrats controlling every branch of Congress and every chamber of Congress and the executive branch. Or you certainly may have it in 24, 28. And why they want to take that risk, I think, is really missing the forest for the trees.
So you said that if it were totally up to you, you would want to start over from scratch. The thing is, your bill, which some will pitch as radical, is obviously far less radical than some of the things that are being discussed that could potentially happen to the court in the future, including increasing the number of justices and things like that. If that sort of conversation becomes more common were Joe Biden to win the presidency, do you think that might serve to drive some Republicans towards your bill as a sort of compromise?
That's a good point. It may, and it may drive some of the Democrats to the compromise. And our bill, term limits for Supreme Court justices, polls off the charts. Expanding the court, it's more complicated. And so I think that our bill will get to a number of the issues that people who are concerned about the makeup are concerned with, and yet it'll do so in a way that I think many Americans will see as fair. In fact, Attorney General Holder had said that it's a very important idea, and he was behind it. And so I think you could get a lot of people at senior levels of the legal establishment supporting something like this, which doesn't mean that we should rule out any other option. I mean, all the options should be on the table, but certainly this one seems to me the lowest hanging fruit.
You know, and you said we shouldn't rule out any other options. I was actually surprised during the debate that Joe Biden, while he was perfectly willing to say some of the progressive priorities that he wasn't in favor of. He said, my plan isn't the Green New Deal, things like that. When he was asked about expanding the court, removing the filibuster, I think quite notably, he didn't actually say one way or the other whether he would. Does that give you hope as a proponent of reform to the Supreme Court that he might be willing to look into that?
I do. I think the filibuster, we should come out very clearly now and say it should be gone, not just because of the court, but because of any progressive priority. This idea that we're going to have 60 senators holding up every progressive piece of legislation is just not a right way of governing. Imagine if we didn't have that, how much more Obama would have probably gotten done. In terms of the court, you have serious people like Eric Holder and others have said that we need to look at a possible expansion, and I think the vice president takes their counsel seriously. And it would be, I think it would be irresponsible to rule anything out before the election, and to see, how the Republicans really go through with this process or not. So I think that the vice president on that issue, I think he's actually handling it fairly well.
And my final question, I feel like every time you come on the show, I ask you a question like this because I see you as obviously a friend of the movement who has seemingly similar legislative goals, but you're actually in the halls of Congress with these people. When I see some of the comments about the Republican Party, the need for a powerful Republican Party, I fear that the Democrats don't get the power is power and power is the most important thing approach that Republicans have to the Supreme Court, to governance. What is your view? You don't have to name names, obviously, but when you talk to these people, do they get that it's not the 80s anymore and that Mitch McConnell doesn't care if you quote him being hypocritical or anything like that?
Well, it's a big challenge because, look, the essence of being a liberal, the essence of being a progressive is a view that we don't believe that might makes right, that we don't believe in the exercise of power for power's sake, that we believe that power has to be exercised with some principle in mind, some view of justice, some view of the common good. And so when do you have another side that is simply about power, that is simply about the maximization of power, that is so antithetical to the worldview that has motivated so many people on our side to get into politics? And the challenge is, though, that is unfortunately the system we have. And so we need street fighters on our side to win that battle against a unprincipled Republican Party, and then hopefully that clears the way for a more principled politics, which is much better than just a tit for tat of power on both sides. But you can't win the raw exercise of power with intellectual arguments, and there's an increasing recognition of that from the younger generation. But I don't celebrate that. I think that is a sad state of our democracy, that's what's happening.
I agree. And hopefully come November, you'll get a few more of those street fighters. There's some races that look like they're going in the right direction. Congressman Khanna, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Always great.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.